Hi there, this is Sam from Solar.com, and today we're going to talk about the carbon footprint of solar panels and exactly how much cleaner it is to produce your own electricity with rooftop solar compared to pulling that electricity from the local utility grid. So let's get after it. All right, let's get started by establishing that there are, in fact, carbon emissions associated with solar panels. Now, most of these emissions are produced in upstream processes, that's mining, transportation, manufacturing equipment, even installing panels. And then there are some associated with maintaining and operating panels and then decommissioning them at the end of their useful life. Altogether, these are known as life cycle emissions, and they're measured in CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. Now, we use CO2 equivalents because in addition to carbon dioxide, there's also gases like methane, nitrous oxide, and other things that are produced, but we measure them all as they equal up to carbon dioxide. Now, the life cycle emissions of all electricity sources have been studied extensively. But in 2014, the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, combined hundreds of previously done studies and found the median value for each source of electricity. Now, in this survey, they found that the life cycle emissions of rooftop solar is 41 grams of carbon dioxide equivalents per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. All right, so what does that even mean? Who among us can picture 41 grams of carbon dioxide floating through the air? Well, here's how to break this down. So 1 kilowatt hour of electricity is about enough to power your fridge throughout the whole day. And 41 grams is about the mass of a chicken egg. So for every day that you power your fridge with rooftop solar, imagine a chicken egg coming down your gutters, rolling into your yard. Now, the average American uses 30 kilowatt hours of electricity per day. So if you have a solar system designed to offset 100% of that usage, you can imagine collecting 30 eggs from your solar system every day. It's 2.5 dozen eggs. Now, that might seem like a lot of eggs, but now let's compare the life cycle emissions of rooftop solar to the life cycle emissions of electricity that's generated from coal or gas. Now, the same IPCC study in 2014 found that the life cycle emissions of gas are 490 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour, and the life cycle emissions of coal are 820 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour of electricity. So compared to rooftop solar, the life cycle emissions of natural gas are 12 times greater, and the lifetime emissions of coal are 20 times greater. However, a recent peer-reviewed study by researchers from Harvard, Duke, and NASA found that it takes as little as 0.2% of gas to leak to make natural gas as big a driver of climate change as coal. And if you're thinking maybe gas leaks aren't that common, well, you might want to think again, because that same study cited recent aerial measurement surveys that found gas leak rates between 0.625% and 66.2% in the US, and comparable leakage rates around the world. So it turns out that even on its best day, electricity generated by natural gas can have a greater carbon footprint than electricity generated by coal. Now, for the sake of this video and for simple math, we're going to say that it's a wash, that natural gas has the same life cycle emissions as coal, which is 820 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour, which is 20 times greater than rooftop solar. So let's get back to our egg metaphor. Now, if you're running your home purely on grid electricity that's produced by natural gas and coal, then for every kilowatt hour of electricity you use, 20 eggs would come rolling down your gutter and into your yard. And let's say you ran the air conditioner for an hour, which consumed 3 kilowatt hours. Your house would look like someone had just won a jackpot in a slot machine. Now, if you're an average American who's using 30 kilowatt hours per day, running entirely on coal and natural gas, that means at the end of each day, you would have 600 eggs rolling down your gutter into your yard. That's 50 dozen eggs in your yard every single day. Now, coal and natural gas make up about 60% of the average US electricity mix. So we can bring that down to 30 dozen eggs, plus whatever remaining emissions there are from the nuclear and hydro and other renewables that make up the other 40%. But still, you tell me, what would you rather have in your backyard every day? 30 dozen eggs, 2.5 dozen eggs. And while I hope this visualization helps, it's important to remember that carbon emissions are not eggs. These are gases that are harmful both as local air pollutants and as drivers of global climate change. So that 20 times reduction you're getting from rooftop solar is absolutely worthwhile. In fact, with a grid mix of around 60% fossil fuels, rooftop solar offsets its upstream emissions within the first few years of operation and reduces 463 grams of emissions for every kilowatt hour produced. For an average size solar system that produces 200,000 kilowatt hours throughout its 25-year warranted lifespan, that adds up to 92.6 million grams or 200,000 pounds of CO2 equivalents, which is roughly the size of a small blue whale. So by replacing and offsetting your grid electricity consumption with rooftop solar, you're keeping a blue whale's worth of greenhouse gas emissions from reaching the atmosphere. And it gets even better than that, because there are still opportunities to further reduce the life cycle emissions of rooftop solar. To do so, we have to understand where those emissions come from in the first place. Now, this chart from the NREL breaks down life cycle emissions into 3 stages: upstream processes, operational processes, and downstream processes. Now, emissions from upstream processes like materials extraction, equipment manufacturing, and installation account for around 60 to 70% of the full life cycle emissions attributed to solar. Now, currently, these processes are mostly powered by fossil fuels, but if we could power them with solar and other low carbon energy sources, we could cut the total life cycle emissions of rooftop solar down to around 18 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour of electricity, effectively cutting the carbon footprint of solar in half. Now, there are also ways to cut emissions in the operational and the downstream processes of rooftop solar. For example, simply siting rooftop solar panels better so they're on the most optimal part of your roof and leaving them up for longer can increase production and therefore decrease the emissions per kilowatt hour of electricity produced. And in the downstream side, making the extra effort to recycle solar panel materials reduces the need for mining in the upstream processes and therefore reduces emissions throughout the whole life cycle. Now, of course, this gets even better if you're able to power those recycling processes with renewable energy and have a smaller impact in that way. So there are opportunities to further reduce the carbon footprint of rooftop solar in all 3 life cycle stages. So why can't we do this with fossil fuels? Well, if you look at the life cycle emissions of coal-fired electricity, you'll see that over 98% are due to operational processes. While we may be able to reduce emissions by powering mining, transportation, maintenance with renewable energy, there isn't much we can do about combustion. It's an inherent part of generating electricity from fossil fuels. Fortunately, for the first time in history, homeowners have a viable and affordable alternative to buying dirty grid electricity from a utility provider. And not only is home solar many times cleaner than grid electricity, it's also more cost effective, especially in the long run. Now, if you'd like to learn more about home solar, use the link in the description below to visit the solar.com Learning Center. Or better yet, connect with an energy advisor to see exactly how much home solar can reduce your carbon footprint and lower your essential energy costs. I'm Sam from solar.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.